everybody. Thank you. I'm insisting on that welcome because we have our 3 speakers here with us, and they're a little bit nervous to speak in front of an audience, but if you're smiling up at them, giving them applause where needed, and then just celebrating their demo, I'm sure we'll have great fun in the next 40 minutes. Good start. I think that we can work with. So let me introduce you to these 3 gentlemen. Here we have Marc, Patrice, and Steffen with us. And I don't want to take too much time from their clock, but the only thing that I'll announce is that their session is going to be about validations and dynamic field controlling. So the stage is yours.
All right, so what is this about? The idea of this session is to show you how to define input validation and dynamic field control declaratively as an annotation. Why would you do that? Because this way you have less custom code to write or maintain in your application, and it's perfect for extensibility. Nothing is better for extensibility than just adding some annotations. I have to say at that point, what you will see now is a preview, so it's not yet officially available, but we hope to make that available in one of the next releases. This session is of 3 parts. In a few minutes, Patrice is going to show you how you use the assert constraint annotation to define validations, and then Marc will show you how dynamic field control works. These 2 features are based on yet another new feature which we have introduced recently, which is annotation expressions. And as that is the basis for the rest, I want to give a little preparation, a glimpse of these annotation expressions. So now I switch over to the demo. Oh no. Annotation expressions, to be precise, what I mean is expressions as annotation values, and this means as first-class annotation values. Now, in the old ages, when you wanted to use an expression as an annotation value, you had to write that as a string. You may know that from the strict annotation, but now, well, now is relative because this is available for a year or so. You can write real expressions syntactically as annotation values, like I have done it here. The important thing is all the time you want to do that, you have to enclose that in parentheses so that the compiler knows, oh, this is a real expression. Now, why would you do that? First of all, the compiler helps you in writing the annotation. So you get editor support, like here. Okay, it's a little bit boring with this one-piece names, but anyway. And the compiler will also check that what you write down is correct. It will check the syntax, and this can also be seen if you now look at the season that is coming out of that. All right, so here we have the season. You see the my old annotation, well, we just store the string in the season, but with the new annotation, where I've used these annotation expressions, you get also a string-like representation, but you get also the parsed expression, so that the user of the season, the consumer of a season, doesn't have to care about parsing the expression, he just gets it like he would get it if I have an expression in a query. The second thing the compiler does for you is it checks that the paths or the references you use in your annotation are valid. So if I would use some element which does not exist in my annotation, like AA, you will get an error saying, well, element AA has not been found. So the compiler makes sure that the annotation that you write down is valid. But it not only ensures that what you write down is valid, it also ensures that the annotation stays valid. Means, for example, if you look at a projection, like here, we have an entity P, which is the projection on E. If we look at P in season, you will see that it inherits the annotation from the entity E. Yes, you will see here my anno1 is now also here available, and if you look at the elements, you will see that the element A of the projection also has inherited this annotation, my anno2. Now, that's good. But what happens if I rename my element? So now I have an annotation at P which refers to A, but A is renamed. Does this work? So if we look at the season again, at P, you will see, well, the old annotation is still A plus B. That is bad because there is no A anymore in P. But if you use the annotation expressions, the compiler takes care, or the compiler realizes that an element you have used in your expression is renamed and will apply the renaming also to the structured annotation here in season. So the compiler makes sure that also if your annotation travels through your model, it always stays valid. And also if you apply some transformations, for example, if you use OData, the model is flattened. So all structured things are flattened out. And of course, if you have done references to these structured elements, this needs to also be reflected, and this is what a compiler does. So no matter what you do with your model, those annotations stay valid. So, but now, Patrice, how can we use that for doing some validations?
I will show you. Let's go. So first of all, this is my first time on the main stage, and I think also in the TV. So I want to take that chance and say hi to my dog, to my mama, and my girlfriend. Now let's get serious. I want to start off with a question. Who of you guys attended the deep dive into CAP.js databases session this morning? Hands up. Okay, I see a couple of hands. That's nice. I hope you enjoyed it. For those who did not attend, let me tell you that we talked a lot about how lazy we actually are. We love to push calculations and complex logic down to the database and let the database do the heavy lifting for us. And today I want to show you how you can also leverage this technique to get more declarative validations by using the new assert constraint annotation, which is available today in an alpha state for the Java stack and will soon be released also for our Nodies. Let's jump right in. I have prepared the well-known S-Flight. Here you can see I'm on the most recent versions everywhere, so you have to go to CDS9 to get all this fancy stuff. That's as a heads up. And now let's start the application and check out what validations we can find in there. Okay, just let me know if it goes black again. Right, let's click into it. Here's the S-Flight application. Not this one, this one. And if we click into it, we can see a nice overview of all our travels. Okay. We can click into one travel. Here we have the reCAP travel, and we can see the general information like description. We have booking fees, start and end date. Also, in the bottom half, you can see related entries like bookings, which all represent a flight. Okay. Now, a couple of things have come to mind here when we see this. So if you edit this mask, probably some inputs should be checked, right? That we don't have stupid data in our database later on. There are a couple of ways to do that, and I can show you how it was done in the past and how it's done currently in the S-Flight repository. And this is not what I wanted to show. Let's get rid of this real quick. We can go over to our, don't save. We can go over to our travel service.js, and I have picked some application layer validations, which we have currently in our Node.js code here, right? And we can see, for example, that there is a check that the booking fee is not empty, or that the begin date is after today, right? Which makes sense, or even that the begin date of the travel is after the end date. We can quickly check how this plays out in the UI. For example, if I delete the booking fee here, you can see the draft is saved, but when I try to save the draft and persist it, we get the error message as has been defined in our application coding here, right? So we issue an error with a nice error message and also let the UI know which field is to be marked red. Okay, so far so good. Now let's go ahead and improve this a little bit, because I just recognized that we can provide a negative value as well, which is probably not too useful here. So we will now together improve this. So first thing I'm going to do is to comment this out. All right. And then we go over to our model, and there we will find the travel entity. And if we go in there, we can find the booking fee field, which is what we just saw in the UI. And now we can replace this JavaScript check with a nice declarative assert constraint validation. And in its most basic form, the assert constraint validation is just the annotation, and then you can provide a nice annotation expression here, as Steffen showed, right? Now it's a full circle moment, basically. Okay, we can now say, okay, the booking fee shall not be null, and also the booking fee, that's right, should be greater than or equal to 0. We save it, and in the background, it gets refreshed already. And if we now change the booking fee to something empty, we get an error message right away. This is nice, because we enabled also the draft messages feature here, which Marc will talk about later on, so stay tuned. What is a draft message? We can go back into our list of travels and go back into our faulty travel, and still the message is there, right? As of now, we only have this pretty generic error message here saying assert constraint booking fee failed. This is because we have not provided any custom message yet. So let's go back to our model, and I will show you how we can add a message to our constraint, okay? What we did before is to provide an implicit condition, and now we can just say the same thing, but we do it a little bit more explicit here. We can say, booking fee is not null, and and booking fee greater than or equal to 0. And then what we can do is we can also provide a message for our constraint. In this case, should be booking fee must be greater than or equal to 0. That's fine, right? That all stays in our model, and we do the rest in the background. So we can remove the booking fee here now again, and we see our nice error message. So far, so good. Let's move on. And by the way, now negative values shouldn't be possible either, right? Okay. Let's change this back to something valid. Go back to our travel service.js, and let's have a look at the other two validations, which I want to replace with you. Here we check if the begin date is after today. It doesn't make sense to create new travels for the past, at least not in the scope of S-Flight. So what we will do now is to leverage best practice Daniel showed earlier on. We will use a nice constraints.cds file for a little separation of concerns, right? And now we can use the annotate directive to annotate, for example, in this case, the begin date of the travel with a nice assert constraint. And this time we call it begin after today, okay? And then we do the same thing as we did before. We provide a condition here, which is an expression again. And here we can say begin date must be, and then I extract the date part of the $now, right? $now is the timestamp of this very second, and we want to only care for the day, okay? And then, that should already do the trick, but if we now look back at our old check, which we are about to replace, we can see the message here has some parameters in here. And we can achieve pretty much the same thing with the annotation, I would argue even in a better way, by using the parameters property in here and just provide, we can, for example, provide name parameters. We can say begin date equals the begin date, yeah. And then in the next line we can say, okay, today equals the date of $now, right? We can again use any expression in here, which is cool, I would say. And now we can provide a message with the parameters, but we can even improve this further. I would say it's good practice, at least for the S-Flight application, to provide internationalization, right? So we can just provide an error code here. We call it begin date after today. That's good. That's good enough. I can save this. Now I go to my messages, and in my messages, I can now just, use the error code we just came up with. Error, begin, date, after today. And now I just copy paste the message from the JavaScript code. And I have to get rid of the $signs here. And now I can say begin date. Begin must not be before today. And here we can now inject the parameters from the annotation, which we came up with, right? I save it and go back to the application. And now we will try to just travel back in time to last year's recap, tap out, and we can see a nice error message as before. Maybe this is because now you could argue I'm lying to you because the JavaScript check is still in place. I will remove this, go back to the application. It restarts in the background, and we are good to go. Now I will do the same thing again, travel back in time, and you can see we get the error message right away. So we have now the notice here that our start date is wrong, but we can still go back to our travels, right? Scroll through here and come back later, still have the message, and then fix it, okay? And then we are able to save the draft. We should be able to save the draft. I think, yeah, because of the timestamp, I have to go in there and say it's all right to say today is also okay, right? Not tomorrow, today is also okay. Now let's go back. Just for my sanity, this has to work. So we change it back to something invalid, okay? And now we can say July 9th, and it works. Whew! Okay. Let's go back to our travel service and replace the last thing here, which is pretty much the same. It's just a sanity check, which makes sure that the begin date is after the end date. I can remove this check, my first thing I'm going to do here, and then we can go ahead and this time maybe annotate the end date with, look at this. Copilot is very helpful here. It provides us with a condition, end date, greater than or equal to begin date, that's right. Parameters end and begin, that's also fine. And an error message. And now we can just use the error message, go back to our i18n file, provide the English fallback here, and press tab, and it says end date must not be before begin date. That should be fine. And now we can go back to our application. Edit this thing again. Now I set the end date to yesterday. And it immediately gives me the notice, hey, something's wrong here. And this is pretty nice. This also stacks with other error messages. So, yeah, and you can see we get all of them here. Right? I go back, and the messages are preserved. So I will now set the messages to something, the fields to something valid again, save it, and one last thing I want to show you. Oh no, before the last thing, I have another last thing, which is the thing which happens in the background. So what we do is we use the database to evaluate the expressions we just came up with. And in this case, we came up with 3 annotations and 3 validations for the travel entity. That means we can send one query. I hope you can all see it here, which consists of 3 calculated fields, right? The first one is highlighted now. This is the check that the begin date is after today. And yeah, if we have a closer look, we just do a case when statement where your expression is in, so we can get a nice Boolean back here. And we even do a nice trick. We negate the whole expression so that if begin date is null, the whole expression turns to unknown on the database, which is not true. And then we go back to the else part of the check, and the constraint is then still true, right? We don't want to annoy you if the begin date is not supplied at all, because there are other annotations for this kind of check. Or you can just say condition begin date is not null, as we have done for the booking fee, for example, right? So we have 3 calculated fields in here, and they get sent once to the database right before the commit of this transaction. So we only do this once, no matter how many travels you insert or update, so that we are as performant as we can get, right? And maybe one last thing now. I want to show you the power of path expressions again to show you some more complicated validations here. For example, if we go to the application and we look at the bookings down here, the flight date, right, should always be in the range of our travel. And this is interesting because this data lives in a different table and in a different entity. What we can do here is we can this time annotate the my booking entity and maybe this time the flight date with, and now we say assert constraint, flight date in travel period. I hope this hint is enough for Copilot to do the rest for me. Let's see. Not quite there. So I will just do it by myself. Stupid AI. Let's go. I can say flight date between. This is a nice, another nice declarative way of checking this. I can just say flight date between, and now I can use the to travel association in the booking to travel up to the other entity and use the begin date. And I do the same thing with the end date. And I think it reads quite nicely. Now we have here the condition being flight date between begin and end date, right? And then again, we can provide parameters and a nice error message in here. And if we go to our i18n file, we can insert this and Copilot does the rest for us, which is nice. Now we start the application in the back. Try to change one of the bookings down here to something invalid, and we immediately get the nice feedback from Fiori that something's wrong with this field in here. So this all should work with deep updates and deep inserts as well. So make sure to leverage our powerful core expression language for any kind of checks. Don't do this in the JavaScript layer. Don't do this in Java, in your Java layer. Let us do this for you by pushing the heavy load down to the database. And with that, I want to hand over to Marc.
Let's see that this works. Yeah, there we are. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Patrice. I want to now continue on that, and I want to talk to you about dynamic field control validations. It's a little bit similar and also uses the same techniques, but it's also a little bit different. So let's also take a look at our S-Flight application here. I'm also here editing a travel, and we have these nice buttons here, accept travel and reject travel. And actually, you see also here there are some mandatory fields. So for example, the starting date is mandatory. It needs to be filled out. But what we actually want is that when we accept the travel, we can do that right now. We don't want to be able to change the data anymore. So when I have accepted the travel, I should not be able to change the start date or the end date anymore. And I also don't want to be able to change the booking fee or other stuff like that. So let's see how we could solve that. We will also switch to our code here. So we have here already those fields for our travel, and we can also take a look at, for example, the begin date again. And in the domain model here, we find the nice mandatory annotation, which basically statically declares the begin date as mandatory. This leads to the asterisk that we saw on the UI that marks this field as mandatory. And it also leads to a backend check that enforces that a value for the begin date is given. Now, what we actually want to do is, for our travel service, we want to make sure that the begin date is mandatory as long as the travel is not accepted, but as soon as the travel is accepted, it should become read-only, and therefore not changeable anymore. And for that, we can also now leverage our annotation expressions, and we can leverage a new feature that allows us to have dynamic mandatory annotations. So we can just say add mandatory, but this time we make it dependent on the travel status.code. And we say it's only mandatory if travel status.code is not accepted. And it should be read-only if travel status.code is accepted. Yeah, so we cannot just only mark it as read-only, because then we would lose the mandatory aspect. So we basically have to here have this mix. We want to make it read-only when the travel is accepted, but mandatory when it's not accepted. So let me just copy that over here also to the other fields to also apply the same principle for those, because this is, we want to have the same logic here for everyone. And we will just rebuild the model. What I'm showing here is using CapJava. With CapJava, we already support this as a alpha, these dynamic, mandatory, and read-only annotations with our latest releases. For Cap Node.js, this is currently in the works. So we can also, let me just quickly make sure that the project is rebuilt, and we will start the application again. And another important thing is this dynamic mandatory is now evaluated on the backend, but it also has the corresponding effect on the UI. And for that, actually, the CDS compiler automatically translates this dynamic mandatory and read-only into the corresponding common field control annotation that is required for Fiori elements. So you don't need to maintain that on your own, but actually we do that for you, and also there take the expression into account. So let's take a look also at that. We can have a look at the EDMX that was generated. Let me look for common.field control. There we already have it. So here, for example, we have the end date. And as you can see, there's a common field control annotation now in the EDMX, which uses the EDM-JSON expressions with this if, equals, and basically this is the equivalent of what we have defined. It's not so nicely readable as our mandatory and read-only annotations, because it also uses the number-based constant. So 1 is basically the constant for read-only, 7 is the constant for mandatory. But we do that behind the scenes for you, and this is the way that also the UI can react to those things and display also the right behavior in the UI client. So let's switch again to the UI, make sure that we refresh the page once for the new metadata to be updated. And if we now go to edit, we still see starting date is mandatory, booking fee and all the other fields are also mandatory. And if I now click on accept travel, those fields become read-only. And this is also really enforced in the backend. We can now still save, but we would not be allowed anymore to change the data afterwards. Okay, let's also, now I kind of a little bit interrupted my demo because I actually wanted to continue with that travel. Let's just restart the application so that we get the data back and we can still edit the travel. So we also have the same validations here in place. Yeah, so basically that was it around dynamic field control. So we now have the possibility to really capture that, validate it on the backend, and also show it correctly on the UI. Now, also coming back to what Patrice showed before, we have basically here in our application also the same assert constraint validations. And we also see that mandatories, for example, enforced, because if I remove the starting date and, for example, also remove the end date and click on save, I get the error messages that these values are missing. If I now again select some valid values here, again, let's choose the 11th of December, but for example, the starting date would now be, the end date would now be before the start date. And I now click on save again. we also see the error messages that the booking has illegal flight dates and that this is not allowed to have a start date, end date that's before the start date. But as you recognized, I always had to click save before these error messages appeared. And for example, if I now start fixing these things again, also all error messages directly vanish from the UI. So let's, for example, produce 2 error messages again, click on save. And now if we edit a start date, if we add one again, so for December 11, suddenly the error messages for end date also disappear. And this is because we haven't enabled the draft messages support yet here in that application. And this is actually, maybe you've recognized that behavior already in the past with CAP applications. This was actually always the case because we didn't support draft messages so far. But now with the draft messages supported, we can actually improve the user experience here. And I also want to show you basically what you have to do to enable the draft messages. And it's very simple, actually. Let's just stop the application. We can just go to our package.json. There's a setting called draft messages. And we can just enable that. And without changing anything in your code or in your annotations, the draft messages feature is enabled, and we get the better UX on the client. Basically, what we do in the background is we actually now manage the life cycle of the errors on the backend instead of on the client as before, which led Fiori to always discard all error messages right away. And this allows also us to go out of the document, go back to the document, and then we can still serve all the error messages even after refreshing the page, for example. And we really know also in the backend control from the backend when certain error messages should be invalidated. And this creates a much better user experience, as we can see in a second. And as also Patrice showed, it's working nicely together with our dynamic field control annotations and also assert constraint. So let's make sure that we refresh the page again so that the draft messages are present. And now, for example, if I remove the start date, I now get immediate feedback. The error message is directly shown. Even if I'm still editing, I don't have to click save. I can also produce another error. Also, if I would refresh the page, the error messages are still present. They are not lost because they can be pulled again from the backend. And also if I save, nothing really happens here. I still get the same error messages as before. And now I can also start fixing those error messages again. Again, choosing the 11th of December, and we see, okay, we have fixed that one error message, but the other error message actually still is present. It doesn't suddenly vanish from the UI. And we can continue also with fixing that error message, making sure that it's something after the start date, and now we can successfully save the draft. That's basically everything that we wanted to show. So you've seen the annotation-based expressions, which are basically the foundation for all of these features. We can use them for assert constraint to define your own validations in a declarative way. You can also use them for dynamic field control and having expression-based or condition-based field control in your application that also directly shows the right behavior in the UI. And we encourage you to enable the draft messages feature, which vastly improves the UX for your draft-enabled applications. And with that, we are basically at the end of our presentation. Maybe just see if that works. Not really. I just wanted to highlight also the survey. Sorry, if you haven't participated in that, remember to also participate in the survey. And I think we still have some time for questions.
Yes, we do. Join me here in the light so that everybody from our online audience can also get to see you. Do we have questions in the audience? Yeah, let's start in the front. And prepare yourself mentally that you'll have to throw it to the other side of the room afterwards. Go for it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. One question, does this also work in a list view? You always showed the object page. I have the requirement, or had the requirement a few weeks ago, that I have a list view with 2 buttons, reject and approve, and I want to use the dynamic field control in there. Do I have, I solved it via virtual properties and some logic, but can I use the dynamic field control, the new one, in the list view too?
So you basically want to toggle if the action is available for a certain entity.
Correct.
Yeah. So you can also use, I think that's a different annotation. I think that's the core operation available annotation from Fiori perspective, as far as I know. And for those, you can also use those expressions, and they are then rendered on the UI. I think for that we don't have the backend support yet, so we do not evaluate that yet on the backend for actions. But this is also on our radar. We actually also want to simplify that, maybe to have a simple add-enabled annotation that you can give, that we also render into this core operation available annotation with the expression, and then also make sure when the action is actually triggered on the backend that we make sure that this condition is met, so that it's not triggered via API, even if it shouldn't be possible to trigger that action. Yeah, but this is not yet done as part of what we have released so far. Yeah, this is still on our list. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
The gentleman in the white shirt, all the way up. Maybe we can have like an in-between stage. Thanks everybody for helping out here.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Firstly, great job. Thank you. Secondly, the question for the middleman in the white shirt. You've been talking about talking about error messages. So, are you planning to like include some info messages or warning messages to this behavior?
Well, as of now, we only have the possibility to provide error messages.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think it would be a nice idea to have that, open a cup issue, I would say.
Yep.
And we will look into it.
Yeah, okay. So I just saw so many parameters what you can pass in, so I was like...
So the approach with the annotations is so flexible that we could also add a severity parameter where you can say error, warning, info, whatever.
Okay. And thirdly, just short question. You mentioned in the beginning that you are prepared for Java. It is prepared for Java, so it is about to be released in a couple of months, right?
So for Java, it's already available today, the assert constraint and the dynamic field control that we showed, also the draft messages. For Node, the draft messages have been released now with the latest CDS 9.1. That's a very new feature there as well. And I think assert constraint and the dynamic field control stuff is in the works and will be published in the next few months. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you, guys.
So there's one more question. Let's do one more question over there because there was already an alarm going off somewhere in the audience that we're at the end of time. But let's squeeze in one more question. As usual, please do find our speakers afterwards. You can then post your questions to them directly.
Okay. Thanks a lot for the very nice presentation. Very impressive. I have a question in regards of the expression language and the condition. Can I use, for instance, a coalescer on the booking fee, which is database?
Yes, because as you have seen, in that case, we take the expression and just pass it down to the database. So what works in the database works in the expression.
Oh, that's really cool. Thank you. Great.
Excellent. A short question to close off the session. Oh yeah, that happens when you give out the microphone, then people just continue talking.
We have the monopoly now.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So very short question. what you demonstrated was from the point of view of a single user. But what happens when you are the user who created a draft and another user clicks accept? First of all, I expect nothing will change on your screen. You will be only warned of things if you try to save or so on, in which case, do those read-only fields get shown to you from the saved state of the document, thus overwriting your draft state, which you might care about, or do they still keep the draft state, in which case you don't see the actual save state? So question.
Yeah, the read-only is actually, so the expressions are, in case of draft, are evaluated on the draft data, but when you activate the draft, the constraints are also enforced during activation. Yeah, so if you have parallel edits to the entity, this doesn't affect your draft, but actually that's not really possible because the draft also locks the entity. So usually you cannot edit the entity at the same time while the draft exists. But yeah, during activation it's enforced on the active version, but during editing we execute the constraints on the draft. Yeah. But we can also follow up later on. I think it's yeah, maybe detailed question now that we're already 2 minutes over time.
Yeah, follow-up is a great keyword actually, because we're at the end of the agenda for today, and the Orga team is already getting prepared for the closing part, which will start in roughly 8 minutes. So stay with us for that part. Until then, thank you so much. One more time, we had with us Marc, Patrice, and Steffen, everybody.
Yep.
This is your round of applause.